Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings and this is the fourth and final video on a series about the basics of music notation. So far we've covered what the staff is, how to draw note heads on the staff. We've talked about what letters and pitches or what the letters and pitches are for the different lines and spaces of the staff based off of what clef you are writing in. We also went over some basics of notating rhythm and talked about the relationships between different types of rhythms, such as the whole note always equals 2 half notes, and then that would always equal 4 quarter notes, and on and on and on. So today in the final video, I'm going to not put everything together, but give you the next thing which starts to put everything together for you. And this is going to be talking about measures. Measures are how we divide the staff kind of into units of time that we fill in with various rhythms. Again, this is not going to be an in-depth study of rhythm, but really just to give you the basics of how to notate it, so as you become more knowledgeable of notes, rhythms, and harmonies, and you want to start writing out your music from what's in your head to actual staff paper that you can share with others, you'll have the skills to do that. And so without further ado, we'll go into measures and the staff. Imagine if you're reading a book and the books, have the letters that create the words, and there's no organization to it. It's just a constant stream of letters. There's no spaces, there's no periods or anything like that. That'll be pretty difficult to read because you have to ask yourself, all right, where does one thing begin and then the next thing end? The same kind of idea happens with measures in music. I'm going to draw a treble clef on my staff. Make sure the pen's selected here. And I'm going to draw some vertical lines. These are called bar lines. And this one right here is a little bit special. We'll get to that in a moment. And the space between bar lines, or the space between the beginning of a staff and a bar line, is known as a measure. Now, measures are used to organize all the symbols that we have, very similar to how punctuation and spaces and such organize our letters into words and then eventually into sentences. So the question then becomes, how do we know what we can put within one measure? And that comes from, the answer to that comes from time signatures. Now, we're not going to go into a real in-depth study of time signatures, but I'm going to give you enough information to be able to get started with figuring out how many symbols you can put within a measure. Now, a time signature has two parts. It has a top and a bottom number. Now, these numbers can be several different things. Again, that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to do. We'll talk about a few time signatures just to help you make sense of what's going on. But we're going to focus on the first number, or the top number of the time signature. And what this top number tells us are how many beats are in a measure. So if I were to go back to my staff here, I'm going to draw a time signature. That top number is 4. And what that tells us is there are 4 beats in a measure. There are no more than 4 beats in a measure, nor are there fewer than 4 beats in a measure. You will always have 4 beats in a measure. So the question becomes, what does 1 beat mean? What symbol do we have that means 1 beat? And for these next few examples, we're going to assume that the quarter note, or the quarter rest, equals 1 beat. This is not always true, but for this example, we're going to say that that's true. 4 quarter notes, or a quarter note, or a quarter rest, is equal to 1 beat. So what that means is, in our first measure here, we could draw 4 quarter notes. I'm going to draw 4 notes here. That would complete that measure. The top number tells us there's 4 beats in the measure. We are accepting right now that the quarter note rhythm, or the quarter rest rhythm, equals 1 beat. That's a complete measure. And then from what we've learned from previous videos, these letters with a treble clef in the staff would be A, B, C, and D. And then we've further learned from talking about what middle C is, and knowing that this is 1 octave higher than middle C, we can figure out on a keyboard what keys represent these notes. We can play them, we can hear them, and decide, hey, are these the tones that we want? So back to the measures. We could also have a combination of notes and rests. I could draw the following here: quarter note, quarter rest, quarter note, quarter rest. That would be acceptable for a measure because it all adds up to 4 beats. I'm using notes and rests, and again, we're assuming that the quarter note and the quarter rest both are equal to 1 beat. Now, going back to the previous video when we talked about the relationships between quarter notes and all of the other rhythms, we learned that the half note, or the half rest, remember half rest looks like a hat, is equal to 2 quarter notes or 2 quarter rests. Well, you can do the math here to go, all right, so a half note would be equal to 2 beats. Since we know that 2 quarter notes equals a half note, and we're going on the assumption that a quarter note itself equals 1 beat, you could draw this in a measure. We could have a half note and 2 quarter notes. That would be acceptable for a measure. This would not be acceptable. Let me draw on the lower staff here. Let me put my clef sign. We'll do that same time signature that has the 4 on the top. And let's say I draw this. And there's our bar line. That would not be acceptable. That would be only 3 beats. You can't assume that the 4th beat, this would be our quarter note, the half note would be beats 2 and beat 3. We can't assume that the 4th beat is a rest because we simply don't know. There's nothing there to tell us to make a sound or make a silence. So the key to measures is you have to have the exact number of beats that the time signature, the top number of the time signature tells you. Now, like everything, there are exceptions to the rule. There are things called pickup notes that's just beyond the scope of the discussion, but do know that there are times there are exceptions to this. But I'd say, 90% of the time, your measures are going to be complete, always with that certain number of beats. Now, I'm going to clear our screen here. We're going to talk about the bottom number for the time signature. So I'll draw our clef again. And we get this is called a 4/4 time signature. Top number is the number we say first. So 4/4 time signature. I'm going to draw a couple more bars. Again, drawing that special bar, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So this bottom number here. This is one of these things of tradition that can probably be written better, but never were, and it's the way it is. It's stuck. The bottom number tells us what type of note or rest, really rhythm, receives. Let's see, I got to think here. Back to my days of English. I before E except after C, so there we go. Or when sounding in A is, or in sounding in A is neighbor and way. Anyway, back to music. So what type of note or rest receives 1 beat? Now the 4 doesn't really tell you a whole lot. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that the 4 means quarter note, and I'll give you a method of figuring that out that I've taught my students in the past that has seemed successful for them. But really, we should write this time signature as such. I'm going to draw on the lower staff. We should do this. We should write 4 in quarter note, because within a measure, we're saying the quarter note gets 1 beat. We can have 4 quarter notes in a measure. And then we can do the math to use other types of rhythms as long as it's equivalent to 4 quarter notes. Now, another way to figure this out that I've told my students is you take the time signature. So in this example, a 4/4 time signature, you turn the top number into a 1, and then you read this like it's a fraction. So 1/4, another way of saying 1/4 is quarter. Thus, a quarter note, and likewise quarter rest, is going to receive 1 beat. Because the bottom number tells us what receives 1 beat. The top number tells us how many of those beats can we have in a measure. Now, if you remember from just a few moments ago, I had that measure where I had a half note and 2 quarter notes. I'll draw that again for you. Let me draw a half note and 2, Did my stem on the wrong side. Quarter notes. Now, there's 3 notes in this measure, half note, 2 quarter notes, but they equal 4 beats because we learned in a previous video that the half note is worth 2 quarter notes. That's where you get the total of 4 beats from. Now, quarter note equal 1 beat is not always true. Let's say that we had a time signature, and this will be the other example I give you, such as 6/8. So I'm going to erase this here. I want to make sure nothing gets cut off from the video. So we'll do 6/8. Now, totally different number on the bottom. Using the suggestion that I gave you, turn it into a fraction with a 1 on the top. That would be spoken as 1/8. Thus, 1/8 note, or 1/8 rest, equals 1. So let me go up here to the top of our top staff. We're going to change this to 6/8. So in this example, the top number, which is number of beats in a measure, tells us we have 6 beats. So we can do any combination of notes and rests that's going to equal 6 beats. And that bottom number has told us that the 1/8 note is equal to 1. Well, in the previous example, quarter notes equal to 1. That's why there's not always, steadfast quarter note always equals something. It's always equal to 2 1/8 notes. It's always half of a half note, but the beat value is not always the same. So in this example, I could draw 6 1/8 notes. I could either use individual flags, or I can beam them together. We talked about beams in the previous video. That would be acceptable for 6 beats. I could also, if I wanted to, I could draw 3 half rests. Nope, not 3 half rests. What am I thinking? I could draw 3 quarter rests. That would be equal to 6 beats because an 1/8 rest is equal to 1. A quarter rest is an 1/8 rest is half of a quarter rest, so 2 1/8 rests equal a quarter rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We get to our 6 beats. So I'm not going to go into a lot of different time signatures, but I wanted to explain a bit about how you figure out what you can put into a measure. And the way we do that is by looking at the time signature, which tells us the number of beats we can put into one of these measures and what type of note gets 1 beat. And I gave you the method here of you can change that to a fraction, read it as a fraction, and that tells you what kind of a rhythm or what kind of a rest is going to get 1 beat. Now, 6/8 is a bit special. There are a couple of different definitions of beat for that. Again, beyond the scope of what we're doing, but for the basics, this will work for you. So I want to talk about this symbol for just a moment, what I've circled here, the double bar. The double bar is used to say this is the end of a piece. So think of it as the end of your story. You get to the double bar, you're done with the piece. You don't necessarily have to have this, but it's like having your book without punctuation or such in it. When the musician sees that double bar, they know that they've made it to the end. There's nothing else to play or sing after that. Now, there's another type of bar that you might see, which is still a double bar, but it doesn't have the real thick bar on the right-hand side. This kind of double bar is usually used to bring your player or singer's attention to something, such as, let's say that we have started a new section of music, and even though it's the same song, this is a whole new musical idea, like movement 2 of a 3-movement work. You would sometimes use a double bar to indicate that. Or if we talk about key signatures, that eventually as you study composition and learn about scales and harmonies, you'll learn about key signatures. If that changes, composers will often use this kind of a double bar just to get your attention to say, hey, something major is happening. We're not done with the piece, but pay attention to what's around this area of the music. So for measures, we are simply keeping everything organized in our music based off of what the time signature tells us. That time signature talks to us about beats and what type of rhythm is in a beat, and then we use what we know about how different rhythms relate to one another, such as whole note equals 2 half notes equals 4 quarter notes. We use those relationships to determine how much stuff we can place into a measure. So you finally made it to the end. We've covered a lot of material in these 4 videos as far as just notating music on staff paper or on the staff. We didn't even touch, what particular notes and harmonies mean and how we express rhythms and express divisions of time. All we covered was just the basics of notating it. But I hope through this you gained a bit of knowledge and maybe lit the fire a bit to study more aspects of music, start learning about notes, rhythms, and harmonies to where you can start composing some of your own music. Or you can take some of the music that you've already been kind of playing around with and in your head and start translating it into written music on the staff. So thank you for taking the time to watch the series. I hope it was beneficial for you. Just like any of the videos on my channel, you are most welcome to give comments, either give feedback to me or maybe share some ideas with some of the other viewers about, hey, here's another way to think about doing notation and such. I'm not the be-all, end-all source of knowledge for notation, and the goal is for folks to learn and just be more competent with the music that they would write. So thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video or any of the others, make sure you click like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you're aware of new content being posted, and I will see you the next time.